The United States is the only developed country with no federal law requiring employers to offer paid holidays to employees. Some 77% of employers in the US do offer paid holidays to workers, but the amount varies from company to company, and overall US workers take fewer holidays than those in many other developed countries. In November, 38% of Germans surveyed by Kiel's NET Institute for Tourism Research in Northern Europe said they had flown on holiday within the past 12 months, slightly down from the all-time high of 41% in November 2018. Among under-30s, the age bracket driving the Fridays for Future movement, it was 47%. For their study, published last month, the Australian researchers trawled the accounts of 128,000 Twitter users. The personality mapping tool, which requires around 100 pieces of self-written content about an individual's life or thoughts to run its linguistic analysis, can also use content from things like emails or forum contributions. Palm oil's ubiquitous presence in our lives is, in part, down to its unique chemistry. Harvested from the seeds of the West African oil palm, it's pale in color and odorless, making it a convenient food additive. The oil has a high melting point and is high in saturated fats, which is ideal for creating melt-in-the-mouth creams and confectionaries. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Widnes was home to soap factories and a thriving chemical manufacturing industry. Today, those factories are gone and the contemporary smellscape is quite different. MacLean wanted to explore Widnes' smelly history as well as its contemporary smellscape. MacLean creates maps of towns with data on what scents can be perceived in a specific area. Language is nothing if not fluid, and neologisms like girl boss are no exception. Fast forward a mere half-dozen years and this particular formulation looks to have evolved into just another linguistic tool of oppression, doing the very opposite of what it was intended for, denigrating rather than celebrating, patronizing rather than promoting. The paper, which looked at the lives of heterosexual men and women working for private companies with 100 or more employees, found that married women were twice as likely to be divorced 3 years after their promotion to CEO level compared to their male counterparts. In the public sector, using 3 decades worth of records. In Sweden, which ranks first in the EU's Gender Equality Index thanks to factors like generous parental leave, subsidized daycare and flexible working arrangements, economists recently studied how promotions to top jobs affected the probability of divorce for each gender. The result: women were much more likely to pay a higher personal price for their career success. Many of us struggle with the never-ending nature of our to-do lists, explains Elizabeth, author of The Art of Life Admin and a New York-based professor of law at Columbia University. A large part of why we feel overwhelmed is that life admin is endless and invisible, she says. We all have different types of admin that might not be recognizable to someone else. By using artificial intelligence in ice-making system, indoor environment control and energy conservation, the oval will be able to accurately control the temperature and thickness of the ice and the stability of its surface, providing athletes with favorable skating condition. At the same time, the temperature of the spectator seat area will be kept around 16 degrees Celsius. Broadly speaking, people in East Asia share collectivistic traits, prioritizing others and engaging in behaviors that benefit the group, rather than individualistic traits, which are more often selfishly motivated. While Behrens pushed back on that generalization earlier in her career, she believes that overall that spirit does exist. In a recent study looking at the effects of a diet high in plants, but not strictly vegan, researchers used indexes that ranked people according to how much of their diet consisted of plant-based foods, compared to animal foods. Even those who ate the most plant-based foods also ate some dairy, fish and meat. A handshake not only conveys your level of extroversion, expressiveness and employability to an interviewer, but also helps you learn about the person you are meeting too. A good handshake has the potential to put interview candidates at ease. Likewise, a bad one can set them up for an awkward encounter. Malls are so ubiquitous in Hong Kong, it's hard to keep track of where the malls end and public space begins. A typical commute might take you through 2, 3 or even 4 malls, all of them linked by footbridges and connected to the MTR, Hong Kong's widely used subway system. One method involves exposing a polymer fiber to the odor, so that the smell-causing chemical compounds in the air can stick to it. Then Bambibre analyzes the sample in the laboratory, dissolving the compounds stuck to the fiber, separating them and identifying them. The resulting list of chemicals is effectively a recipe for the scent. Research into these effects couldn't come at a better time. The world is in the midst of a crisis of over-medication, with the US alone buying up 49,000 tons of paracetamol every year, equivalent to about 298 paracetamol tablets per person, and the average American consuming $1,200 worth of prescription medications over the same period. This familiar scent is not only a simple pleasure for people who like to peruse libraries and bookshops. These smells have a cultural heritage value, and they are at risk of being lost. For every old book that falls apart, is thrown away or kept locked behind a temperature-controlled curatorial door, these scents become harder to experience. The legal concept of ownership in Japan isn't remarkably foreign, he says. Communal property is virtually unheard of except for that many people seem to regard umbrellas as up for grabs if not properly secured. The abundance of police officers and cultural traditions that prompt people to think first of others are perhaps more enlightening than any notion that the Japanese are more honest. When it comes to handshakes, firm is best. Firm handshakes have been linked positively to extroversion and emotional expressiveness and negatively to shyness and neuroticism. They have also been associated with openness to new experiences in women. Equally, limp, wet handshakes are almost universally disliked. Even the vehicle you traveled in today, bus, train, or car, ran on fuel containing palm oil. Much of the diesel and petrol we use has a component of biofuel added to it, which mainly comes from palm oil. Even the electricity that powers the device you're reading this on may have been generated in part from burning oil palm kernels. According to the China Academy of Information and Communications Technology, Chinese mobile phone market posted a year-on-year contraction of 6.2%, with 389 million units in shipments. The 2G phones, 3G phones and 4G phones shipments were 16.13 million units, 58,000 units and 359 million units, respectively. These blood tests can look for raised levels of a protein called prostate-specific antigen, which can indicate that something is amiss. Conducting widespread screening using PSA is difficult because its levels can be raised by a number of conditions including urinary tract infections. But in men carrying a faulty BRCA2 gene, it becomes a powerful tool for detecting a developing tumor. These factors helped instill a generally positive view of robots in post-war Japan. Industrial automation had provided a major economic boon, and humanoid robots were an innocuous curiosity. The West, meanwhile, tended to take a less sanguine view. The US, preoccupied with the Cold War, poured funding into robotics for military uses, which cast a threatening aura over the field. It's unlikely a vegan diet will cause an iron deficiency, says Springman, as long as your diet includes fruit and vegetables of every color. Over time, the body can adapt to how much iron there is in our diet, and if you have a lower iron intake it can make more efficient use of that iron, he says. An unusual chunk in a meteorite may contain a surprising bit of space history. Presolar grains, tiny bits of solid interstellar material formed before the Sun was born, are sometimes found in primitive meteorites. But a new analysis reveals evidence of presolar grains in part of a meteorite where they are not expected to be found. The Sun is our nearest star, a gigantic nuclear reactor that burns about 5 million tons of hydrogen fuel every second. It has been doing so for about 5 billion years and will continue for the other 4.5 billion years of its lifetime. All that energy radiates into space in every direction, and the tiny fraction that hits Earth makes life possible. The domestication of other species has played an undeniably central role in the evolution of modern humans, and in our planetary dominance and success. In view of this fact, researchers have over the years investigated the genetic underpinnings and the anatomical, neural, physiological and behavioral consequences of domestication across a number of animal species. Darwin's observations and conclusions on variation under domestication hold true today. The evolutionary specificity of domestication, such as the wide phenotypic diversity of domesticates, remain puzzling. Indeed, the variation range of certain traits within a domestic species occasionally exceeds that within whole families or even orders. Rising global average temperature is associated with widespread changes in weather patterns. Scientific studies indicate that extreme weather events such as heat waves and large storms are likely to become more frequent or more intense with human-induced climate change. This chapter focuses on observed changes in temperature, precipitation, storms, floods, and droughts. While the concepts of climate and weather are often confused, it is important to understand the difference. For example, the eastern United States experienced a cold and snowy winter in 2014, 2015, but this short-term regional weather phenomenon does not negate the long-term rise in national and global temperatures, sea level, or other climate indicators. The first images from NSF's Inouye Solar Telescope show a close-up view of the Sun's surface, which can provide important detail for scientists. The images show a pattern of turbulent boiling plasma that covers the entire Sun. The cell-like structures, each about the size of Texas, are the signature of violent motions that transport heat from the inside of the Sun to its surface. Glaciologists have described Thwaites as the most important glacier in the world. It is massive, roughly the size of Britain. It already accounts for 4% of world sea level rise each year, a huge figure for a single glacier, and satellite data show that it is melting increasingly rapidly. There is enough water locked up in it to raise world sea level. In recent years, annual increases in total healthcare spending have been 5 to 10 percentage points higher than GDP growth. About 13% of China's health spending goes toward treating diabetes, and perhaps 4/5 of that is spent treating complications that could be avoided. China has an opportunity to save both money and lives. Lost umbrellas, on the other hand, are rarely retrieved by their owners. Of the 338,000 handed into lost property in Tokyo in 2018, only 1% found their way back to their owner. The vast majority, about 81%, were claimed by the finder, which is a peculiarity in itself. In fact, the profligacy of umbrellas can work the other way. Residents in some areas around the capital, Canberra, had been warned that it was too late to leave and they should try to seek shelter. The fire south of Canberra is still out of control and has already burned more than 20% of the territory's landscape. However, the fires did not reach the capital's southern suburbs. Although Buddhist principles like mindfulness have filtered into mainstream Western culture, other key tenets might not be as well known. According to Buddhist cosmology, life is suffering experienced within the cycle of birth, death and rebirth. In Lama's painting, we are in the big wheel that Yama, the lord of hell, is holding. New York is without doubt one of the most dynamic, diverse and creative cities in the world, a cultural center of almost mythic proportions, celebrated by generations of artists for its unparalleled extremes of wealth and poverty, glamour and grime. From the glorious peaks of the Roaring Twenties to the squalor and destitution of the 1970s. Geologists are able to work out what ocean oxygen levels were like millions of years ago by measuring the relative amounts of different types of uranium found in sedimentary rocks formed at that time. The rocks soak up a heavier form of uranium when surrounded by low oxygen waters, and a lighter form when oxygen levels are high. A city and the cultural works it inspires are inextricably linked. Over time they become integral to that city's identity, part of its fabric and how it is perceived in the popular imagination. But while cultural works often have cities at their center, the manner in which they can be explored in order to further our understanding of that city is often undervalued. Occurring during a parade for French National Day, a turning point in the French Revolution, it could have been a moment of solidarity between the leaders of two great nations. Instead it turned into one of the most awkward, lingering handshakes in recent memory. Without being able to hear what they discussed, their body language became a surrogate for sentiment. One common motivation for shunning steak and Stilton and going vegan is the promised health benefits. The vegan diet is generally considered to be higher in fiber and lower in cholesterol, protein, calcium and salt than an omnivorous diet, but there are still misconceptions and concerns around cutting meat, fish, eggs and dairy completely from our diets. Losing a wallet or purse is more than an. While smartphones now let us make contactless payments, hold our travel cards and help us to find our way home, there's still something reassuringly secure about carrying physical ID and bank cards. Not only does misplacing your wallet leave you without a way of paying for a few hours. Apart from the obvious benefits of shepherding young people towards endangered alphabets, Brooks says digitizing scripts might be a way of circumventing the dominance of Arabic, Latin and other major alphabets. He imagines a world where activists could write in their own alphabets and see them automatically translated for colleagues abroad. Along with the spoken words, something else is also at risk, each language's individual script. When we talk about endangered languages, most of us think of the spoken versions first. But our alphabets can tell us huge amounts about the cultures they came from. Just as impressive is the length people will go to save their scripts to the world. According to the traditional Western view, a machine that acts like a person is violating natural boundaries, dangerously conflating the sacred and profane. This ethical warning shows up prominently in modern myths about technology, which derives much of its moral message from the Bible, says Christopher Simons, a professor of comparative culture at the International Christian University. However, the biggest mystery surrounding the Ediacarans is what happened to them. At one point they must have been thriving. Fossils of rangeomorphs and others have been discovered in locations all over the world, from Russia to Australia, and Namibia to China. However, they suddenly disappeared from the fossil record approximately 30 million years after they first arrived. The Ediacaran fossils herald a watershed moment in the history of Earth. For the previous 4 billion years, the oceans had been the preserve of single-celled microbes, yet suddenly they were teeming with new complex life. And what strange life it was! The creatures look nothing like anything seen today. Both men and women have the same risk of developing BRCA1 and 2 gene mutations, but men are 10 times less likely to get tested for them. One potential reason for this is the general misconception that the genes are synonymous with breast cancer, and many men don't believe they have breast tissue. The impact and devastation in areas of these bushfires have been unprecedented. While it will address property loss suffered by businesses, the meet will also look at the bushfire's impact on supply chains, staffing and customer levels. The meet comes as Westpac estimates the bushfire crisis will cost the Australian economy $5 billion and cut up to 0.5% of its economic growth. The NBS data showed that the rise in core CPI, which excludes food and energy prices, remained low at 1.4% year-on-year in December, unchanged from a month earlier, indicating sluggish domestic demand. To reduce financing costs for the real economy, China's central bank may cut required bank reserves another 2 or 3 times this year, and the loan prime rate.